All right, so South African independence. You guys should have that in your notebooks now. And we just went over some answers to the do now. So here we go. All right, I'll give you a second here. All right, so if we kind of go back into the course and think about some earlier lessons, when we talked about imperialism, we talked about the scramble for Africa, as it was called. We went over which territories in Africa went to which European superpowers. So, as a result of that, this is actually a typo. This should say Berlin Conference, not Congress of Vienna. So I need to change that. But Berlin Conference awards South Africa to Great Britain. So when they're breaking up all of those parts of Africa and deciding who's going to take control of what, it is essentially decided that Great Britain is going to be in control of South Africa. So South Africa, all the way at the bottom of the map there, you could see. And that's kind of the deal. So for the next 100 years, white European settlers are going to make their way to South Africa. And the thing about South Africa is tons of gold and diamonds, amongst other things. But the big thing is diamonds and other precious metals, discovered around the late 1800s and still being mined there today, for sure. All right, I will give you a brief second here just to jot this down. So with regard to the larger kind of British Empire, India, which we just finished studying, was really one of the last of Britain's colonies to be granted independence, probably because it was such a lucrative, it was the crown jewel, as they say, of the British Empire. So South Africa, technically speaking, gains its independence much earlier than that, 30 plus years earlier than that. So 1910 is when they are granted independence, and we say sort of for a reason. So even though the official political arrangement is independence, in reality, the people that remain there and the people that are in power in South Africa continue to be those European settlers and their descendants. Even today, there is a significant portion of South Africans that are white. Okay, they're born and raised in South Africa, and they are white. Famous actress named Charlize Theron is South African. There's there's a whole lot of white South Africans even today. So these European settlers, even though independence has been granted, they're going to remain in South Africa to continue mining gold and diamonds and continue kind of stripping the natural resources out of the territory. So even though politically they're independent, there's still this kind of economic oppression and kind of thievery, for lack of a better term, that's continuing on in this area. So the people that once were in charge of this territory, even though they gained independence, are still not in charge of this territory. They're really just independent in name only and very little else. All right, I'll give you a second here. All right, so a significant part of this topic is about what's called apartheid. Okay, so we have a couple things at work here. The indigenous natives of South Africa are black. Okay, and the people that remain behind, even after independence is granted to South Africa, the people that remain behind are the rich white European settlers and their descendants that are there to continue mining the gold and diamonds and exploiting the natural resources of this particular area. So this is still kind of an imperialistic kind of arrangement, a colonial arrangement very much. So the inequality and racism that is made evident during imperialism, like when we read that poem, The White Man's Burden, um, that still exists. And it sets the stage for this system of extreme segregation known as apartheid. We need to know about this. This is an important takeaway here. So I think that when we think of segregation in the American South, for example, we think about separate bathrooms and separate water fountains and separate facilities. You're over here, you're down the street over there, etc. Things like that. Apartheid in South Africa was basically segregation on steroids. Okay, instead of uh, blacks and whites having different water fountains, under apartheid, blacks and whites have different cities and towns. So the kind of the extreme segregation was so severe to the point where not only did these people not kind of want to use the same water fountain, they didn't even want to be in the same city. Um, Whites did not want blacks in the same cities as them, so it created these pockets and bubbles where this is a white city or town, and this is a black city or town, etc. And one of the things we'll come to find out is that people couldn't travel freely. If they were black, they couldn't travel freely around South Africa, and they passed laws where you had to have, basically a pass called the pass laws that allowed you to move around freely and things like that. So this remained an issue all the way up until 1994, where you finally get the first free democratic elections. But up until 1994, there's still institutional apartheid and segregation. And I mean institutional. This is not something that people this is not a system that people adopted on their own socially amongst themselves. This is government sponsored racism and segregation. Okay, this is sponsored by the government, by the state. It's institutional. And once we finally get free democratic elections in 1994, that's all going to change. But until then, apartheid remained. So I think oftentimes we think of these things as existing a long, long time ago and are long since forgotten. But I was 14 years old when this was happening. I was aware that this was a thing. So this is happening during my lifetime, when I wasn't much younger than, you guys are now. So this is not as far back as you may care to think. Okay, last slide. So we said this is going to last until 1994, and the pivotal event of 1994 is Nelson Mandela is elected president. Now, the ANC, the African National Congress, is a political party dedicated to the independence of South Africa, and they have been around for a long, long time prior to 1994. But they were marginalized and silenced by the white South Africans that remained in power. And they kind of had to go underground, for lack of a better term. But as the institutions of apartheid are continued to kind of erode and come apart, the ANC is kind of coming back into focus and back into the picture in a more public way in South Africa, leading up to 1994. So in '94, when South Africa finally has the first real, legit democratic election, the president that they elect is Nelson Mandela. And it's important to note that the vast majority of South Africans are black. They make up a overwhelming majority, and they elect Mandela as their president. Mandela spent a long time fighting apartheid. And when I say fighting, I mean fighting. We went over Gandhi and his kind of nonviolent protest, civil disobedience angle. In his later years of activism, Mandela will kind of turn to more of that style, but in his earlier years, he took a different approach. And that is something that we will kind of go over the course of the next few days. But very different dude for sure. So essentially, he is going to fight against apartheid, and he's going to be imprisoned for 27 years. On he'll catch a charge, but they will extend and kind of exacerbate his charge and his prison sentence for a long time. He spent 27 years in prison. Okay, so once he's freed and apartheid kind of comes apart at the seams officially, and is officially kind of abolished as an institutional policy, Mandela will have the opportunity to kind of rise up.